Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Hello Fam podcast. I'm excited to see you all here with us today. And first, brief update, we are happy to share that our latest feature, the Hello Fam Longevity Timeline, is now out. This update provides you and your loved ones the ability to visualize where you are in your longevity journey in terms of your favorite hobbies and activities. To learn more about these features, watch our previous episode with Dr. Anish Patel and Dr. Jonathan Muniz. Now, back to the podcast where we talk to longevity doctors, key opinion leaders, and others onto their views into longevity. Our goal is to provide you with a greater insight into the world of living long and well as learn some practical tips to incorporate into your daily lives. Today's guest is actually an expert in the VO2 Max field, so join me in welcoming Dr. Donald Bennett. Hi, doctor.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I love what you guys are doing. This is great because longevity medicine is a passion point for me, and it's super fun to help people get to that next level and really live life to their fullest potential.
Yeah, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with us today. So, starting off, can you give us a little background about yourself, how you got to medicine, MOOV Health, which is our partnership company, as well as any hobbies and interests?
Yeah. So kind of funny. Um, many years ago in the early 90s, I accidentally ended up in an EMT class of all things, and started figuring out that I really liked helping take care of people. And I got this crazy idea one day when I was a paramedic that maybe I'd go to medical school. And my wife was like, "You better hurry up because you're not getting any younger." And so I went to medical school after doing my undergrad at Loma Linda University. I went to St. Louis University, and I graduated there. Even did some research while I was in med school. And then we had the global war on terror start after 9/11, and I volunteered and became a Navy physician. And I deployed multiple times with the United States Marine Corps and the United States Navy off into combat zones. And I was honored to be able to be the officer in charge of a shock trauma platoon and help a lot of our young men and women who are serving our country and a lot of the people that lived in those countries come home. And so I got to really affect care and practice medicine all over the world, everywhere from Africa to the Middle East to India, and on the high seas and in the deserts and in the mountains. So I got a really great exposure during that time. And after a while, 5 kids later and a career, decided to leave the Navy and go into private practice. And a few years ago, I embarked on a fellowship in metabolic health, anti-aging, and longevity medicine. And so I'm a fellowship trained physician in this field, and I run a practice in Utah where we help people achieve health like they never thought possible before. So we look at their longevity metrics and help them optimize themselves to really feel good and heal in ways that they didn't think was possible.
Yeah, I really liked what you said about achieving health that they didn't think was possible. I think that's a great mission to have and a great goal to give people. So thank you so much for sharing, and I hope our listeners are excited to learn more about you and what you do. So let's dive right into first discussing HelloFam's mission, increasing longevity. So you kind of touched on this already, but what is your definition of longevity?
So for me, longevity is living in a way that you feel great every day. So um, we want to age in a way that allows us to enjoy getting older, not dread getting older. Um, I want us to be able to, when we're in our 70s and 80s, to be able to travel and not be fearful of getting up out of the seat in the airline because someone at the window has to go to the restroom. I want that to be an easy thing when I'm in my 80s. And I want people to feel good and feel vibrant. I want them to still enjoy physical intimacy. I want them to have the energy that they need to do things. And I don't want them to suffer needlessly from a small fall that most of us would get up and walk away from. When you get old and you don't have longevity medicine in there, you end up with a broken wrist or a broken hip. And so for me, longevity is aging in a way that keeps us vibrant and healthy and out of the convalescent home.
Yeah, that's a great outlook. And I think that is the main thing. Staying happy is such a big part of longevity. You can grow old, you can go be what you are, but if you're not satisfied and self-fulfilled, I think it's a great way of looking, a great angle at looking at longevity.
Yeah.
So, going along with more of what your field of expertise is, let's first understand how a VO2 max reading is a key snapshot of your vitals. Why is this reading considered such a powerful predictor of overall health and longevity compared to other readings? And when should the average adult get a test done?
Yeah. So there's a lot there to unpack. First, what's a VO2 max? Like, what is that? So VO2 max is your body's ability to extract oxygen at the cellular level. And the way we look at that is how much is your heart beating per minute? How much is it putting out with every squeeze? And then when that blood goes downstream and gets to the end and goes from the arteries to the veins, how much oxygen has been extracted at the tissues. And so what VO2 max represents is how well is your heart pumping and how well is your body extracting the oxygen at the tissues when you've stressed yourself out to the highest level. Because the more capacity that you have to do that, the healthy you are. And they started doing research on this all the way back in the 1870s. Amazingly, right? I mean, no electricity, and they were figuring this out. This doctor named Fick, right? He was doing these things and looking at how well his subjects extracted oxygen and measuring all of this. And then later, they were able to put all of that together and put people like on treadmills and figure and measure the gas coming out with a balloon bag of all
Wow.
things. And they were looking at how much oxygen were you extracting and how much CO2 were you putting out. Now we have micronized devices. Literally, I put a backpack on the patient and a mask, and we bring them to our clinic, and all of our patients, 100% of our patients that come to our clinic, they get this test. And then we put them on a treadmill or a bike, and we could put you on a rower, we could put you on, if you're in a wheelchair, we could put you on the arm skier or an an arm bicycle, right? A hand bicycle. It wouldn't matter. It's putting you into that stress level. And then we put you through increasing stress levels, and we measure how much oxygen is coming out that and you're extracting and how much CO2. And that tells us, based on your heart rate and those metrics, how healthy you are. Not only how well is your body working, but at the cellular level, all the way down in your cells, how well are they working? Are you metabolically healthy or not? So it's really the most important vital signs, more important than your blood pressure. It's more important than your cholesterol. It's more important than your heart rate variability. And it's a test that you can't cram for. You can't eat really good for a week and make this test better. It's something that you have to continually do. The great news is you have 100% control over it. If you want to increase your VO2 max, you can. So VO2 max is this test that we do that tells us how healthy your body is at the heart level, at the vascular level, and at the cellular level. And it's really an important metric. In fact, in 2016, the American Heart Association said it should be the vital sign that we're measuring on everyone, but we're not doing it yet. And so that's why we decided to institute it in our clinic. Now, one of the other questions that you had was, when should it be measured? I think everybody should get it measured, and they should probably get it measured once a year, at least. And I'm going to go into why. Number one is that your VO2 max tells you how to exercise efficiently and get what you want out of exercise. We all have those friends. They went off to join F45 or Orange Theory or whatever class that all great things, right? They lost 5 pounds, but they've been doing it for a year and they haven't changed at all. You have any friends like that?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
And you're
Yeah,
like,
I was stressing it.
I hate this. I worked so hard. Why am I not losing the weight? Right?
Yeah.
And it's because we don't understand where our real heart rate zones are. So the data that we've been pulling and we hope to publish soon is that your heart rate where you burn your most amount of fat, your predicted versus your tested is a lot of times 20 beats per minute different. So when you go to exercise, you think you're going to burn fat, but really you're just over exercising and burning glucose
Oh my God.
because we don't know what our actual numbers are. And a VO2 max test
Mhm.
tells us those things. And so when we give our patients, our clients the information, they change their workouts. They don't feel as exhausted at the end of their workout, and they just strip the fat right off their body just
Wow.
by able to do that. And that's what so the VO2 max is not only a metric of that, but it gives you this actionable information to make your workouts more efficient. So can you remind me some of the other questions that you had so we address that?
Yeah. So again, like you've also talked about metabolic health and mitochondrial health. How does VO2 max relate to that? And why is this also equally as important to maintain?
Yeah. So so when we when we test our VO2 max, it's seeing how much oxygen we can extract and use. And what we want our body to be doing is we want our mitochondria, or the powerhouse of our cell. Think of an engine inside your cell producing energy, and you're feeding it fuel. Well, the best fuel source you have in your entire body is fat. And for every unit of fat that comes in, you're going to produce 36 or more ATP, energies of units of energy.
Yeah.
Okay. And that unit of energy is going to go do all the things that you need in your cells, contract your muscles, help you breathe, move your food through your abdomen and through your gut, extract the nutrients and make your brain work. All of these things super important. And you want fat to be your primary fuel source while you're sitting, while you're doing things. That's the way nature or God made us, right? Is that we're going to sit there and just fat's going to be our primary fuel source. Then when we need instantaneous fuel source, or we push past what our mitochondria can use, then we're going to burn glucose or sugar.
Mhm.
But for every one sugar molecule that goes in, you only get about 6 ATP. So that's a big difference, 36 to 6. And when we become metabolically unhealthy, when we have type 2 diabetes, when we have insulin resistance, when we have obesity, we even get a bunch of our cells to shift to what we call Warburg metabolism, named after the scientist who found it, where we burn one glucose and we only get 2 packets of energy.
Oh,
And that
okay.
leads to terrible dysfunction in our bodies. Cancer cells do the same thing. That's where we found this first. So in diabetics, we moved to Warburg metabolism, and in cancer cells, we moved to Warburg metabolism. And now you can see the connection between, if you get type 2 diabetes, why cancer rates are so high if you
Mhm.
have metabolic dysfunction. So if we have metabolic dysfunction, we're setting ourselves up for all kinds of problems: high blood pressure, dyslipidemia, or problems with our lipids, and even cancer. It increases our
Wow.
cancer risk. And
Yeah.
so understanding how metabolically healthy or unhealthy we are, getting that true value, then we can take action and change it, because all we have to do to increase our VO2 max is about 30 minutes of movement every day.
Oh, wow. Just
And
that.
and yeah,
Yeah.
you'll increase your VO2 max by 20 to 40%
Mhm.
if you do it the right way.
Yeah, and I think the biggest, correct me if I'm wrong, like the fat to carbohydrates that we use, the sugars, it's about short-term versus long-term reserves. So the
Yeah.
biggest thing is people think fat is bad, but fat is not entirely bad. It's where you're drawing the most of your energy, how you're able to maintain working and doing whatever you do throughout the day. It's because you are drawing on those reserves, and without those reserves, you cannot survive. And again, ATP is that's actually the powerhouse of the cell. It's what mitochondria pumps out based on the food that you're putting out. So I really like the way you connected those and explained that. And going along with what you're saying and the piece of advice that you gave in your practice, how do you go about outlining a treatment plan to improve a patient's VO2 max? And what does success in that field look like?
Yeah, so when they come in, we get all of their metrics and we look at them. And that gives us their true heart rate zones. Are you familiar with heart rate zones?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe some of the listeners aren't.
Mhm,
The old way to calculate heart rate zones was based on
mhm.
Division One NCAA track athletes.
Yeah, I remember
That,
they use a lot of athlete data, which is not
yeah,
representative of the general population
that
because,
might not be good for me or for you. I
yeah,
mean, I can no longer run a sub, seven
yeah.
minute mile. I just, and it just can't. And so the way that we calculate your heart rate zones based on a calculation is you take 220 as the max heart rate minus your age, and then you take it in percentiles. So your zone two, that's kind of the magic adaptation zone. It's not really magic, it's an adaptation zone, and that's 60 to 70% of your heart rate, of your max heart rate.
Mhm.
And so you can calculate that pretty easily by doing some math. But when we test people, we find out that that's so different. So when we get tested, we're able to figure out what our real zone two is. And that zone two is an adaptation zone. So when I prescribe, the first thing I do is if you're metabolically unhealthy, we need to build a base. Just like if you're building a house, you have to have a good foundation. If the foundation's messed up, the rest of it falls apart. And what we don't want is we don't want someone to get set back in their longevity journey, right? To get injured because they decide, I'm going to get healthy. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to run a mile as fast as I can. And then they pull a hamstring, right? And then they're not running, or they pull a groin, or they rupture their Achilles, or whatever happens. And so what we do is we give them this zone. And so, for instance, I had a metabolically unhealthy client come in. He's 5'8", he's over 100 pounds overweight. Okay. And we test his VO2 max. And I'm like, okay, here's your heart rate zones. 90 to, I think it was like 90 to 108 was his heart rate. And I want you to get on the treadmill because it was winter time in Utah, so most people aren't out walking. Get on the treadmill and just, you know, start walking. And when your heart rate gets into this zone, don't go any faster. And if you have to slow down, slow down. And he called me. He's like, Doc, you got to be kidding me. I'm like, what's going on, boss? And he's like, oh, I'm going 2.5 miles an hour and I'm in zone two. And I'm like, perfect. That's great. Stay there. Hung up the phone. He lost 4 pounds a week
Wow.
just by doing that. And in a few months, he had increased his VO2 max by 36%. Okay. When we calculated what that did to his all-cause mortality, it decreased his all-cause mortality by 50%.
Wow.
So he went from a very unhealthy to a much better state just in a few months. And he hadn't even achieved his weight loss goals yet. He just increased his VO2 max to a point that allowed his body to be so much more healthy. So that it's really important to work out in that adaptation zone. So we highlight zone two for our patients so that they can be in that adaptation zone. And the adaptation that we see when you're walking at that brisk pace, and if you're doing it at home, if you haven't been tested, it's you're walking, you can talk, but you can't sing.
Okay.
Okay. You
Yeah.
could talk and have a conversation, but if you're talking too much, you're like, okay, now I'm winded. I got to take some breaths. That's going to be kind of your zone two. So you could
Mhm.
talk, but not a long conversation. You could still talk a little bit, but you couldn't sing. You wouldn't be able to do that. So that's kind of where you could push it. That's if you're going to look at that at home without a test. But that zone two is an adaptation zone. And what we see in zone two is you increase the number of mitochondria, those powerhouses. They're going to eat up the extra fat and process the glucose. You increase that in all of your cells, all your muscle cells. You increase your capillary density. So the number of blood vessels going around your muscles goes up.
Mhm.
Not only that, you start producing more mitochondria in each one of your cells. So they become more efficient. The number goes up, the blood flow increases. And one of the things our bodybuilders love is it increases the calcium pumps in that type 2 fiber. So there's different types of muscle fiber, but in these muscle fibers, they get more calcium pumps. That means they can contract harder.
Mhm.
So what we see is these guys who are plateaued on their weight, they're like, ah, boss, Doc, I can't get past 350 on my deadlift. And I'm like, do you really need to? And they're like, yeah, I really need to. And they start their zone two training because they've been avoiding cardio. And they'll call me back. I'm at 380. I went through my plateau. Thanks. Because we've done the adaptation at the cellular level. Not only allows you to have more strength, it allows you to have better metabolic health. On top of all of that, it decreases your lipids. So it helps you lower your cholesterol. It helps you lower your insulin levels. And if you're suffering from inflammation, like if you have a chronic disease where you're inflamed, it lowers all of your inflammatory markers. So getting out and doing this movement in zone two makes this massive impact in overall health. And
Yeah.
the best part is we have control of it, right? It has a bigger impact on increasing your VO2 max by doing this zone two training, has a bigger impact on your long-term health than smoking, than your cholesterol level, than high blood pressure, than end-stage renal disease, than type 2 diabetes or coronary artery disease. And we get to control it, whether we go out and do the work or not.
Yeah, I've heard of zone two trading before and I've heard that it's important, but I've never heard it explained the way that you've explained it, and that now it makes sense, like the underlying reasoning for it, why if you train that you're improving different areas of your life and like going in that way, whereas branching out. So yeah,
Yeah.
inflammation is such a big thing to keep under control, and it's one of the precursors to so many chronic diseases that can, again, shorten your longevity. So that's great to love the way you explained that and like took us through the mechanisms of it. But I think that on the opposite end, what are common misconceptions you've seen in how people track and improve their VO2 max? And are wearable fitness watches, which I myself wear, are those reliable enough to track VO2 max readings?
So um, they're getting better. Uh, that there's a different technology that's better. So the higher end technology that are made for instance, people training for an Ironman or people who are doing some serious training, they tend to have a much more accurate, when we actually test the VO2 max in office, they're much closer. Um, but a 10% change in your VO2 max can be massive. And what we see is a little bit more than a 10% differentiation. For instance, I bought a wearable, I'm not going to say which company, and I had that wearable on and I just let it track. I didn't put anything in, and it put my VO2 max at 38. But I had tested and I was 54. And so you can see there's a pretty big differentiation between the technology where we're at on a wearable versus actually putting you under stress, looking at your carbon dioxide and oxygen levels and your heart rate all together in making that. And there's some good ways to do it. People can look up, there's a bicycle test that you can do. There's some other things. But I really encourage you to seek out a place where you can get a real VO2 max test. The other one is there's VO2 max testing out on the market that doesn't look at both carbon dioxide and oxygen output. It'll do one, but not the other. And then you're also making a lot of assumptions in their algorithm, and the math gets a little bit fuzzy. So when you're doing it, I recommend that you test with somebody who's looking at both. But any test is better than no test, right? And being more, something is better than nothing, right? Just like when we do the zone two work, I was like, something's better than nothing. If you can get 10 minutes in, that's better than 0 minutes, right? So keep going. Um, I think for the wearables, it's kind of a double-edged sword. You just have to be careful on how good it is and how well does it correlate. And you're definitely going to want to do one of the walking tests that the wearables usually suggest that you do. That makes the accuracy and the variability better. Okay. Um, as far as what was the other portion of the question? Wearables is one.
Yeah, just some common misconceptions and how
Yeah.
you see people try to track and improve their VO2 max. Because one thing that may work, like something that might work for one person is not always going to work for the second person's. And I think that's just a tough concept a lot of people have trouble getting behind. But
Yeah.
in the context of VO2 max, how have you seen this play out?
So I think the biggest misconception is people downplaying whether they should actually be tested. I test people who are very metabolically unhealthy and they have like a knee replacement. but we're still able to test them. So I have this, so I can't be tested is a misconception. Pretty much can test almost everyone. You have to be pretty much just bedbound, to not be able to get some type of test done. And most of us who are doing the testing can do a resting metabolic test, which gives you a bunch of other information. So it's just at rest, how well are you pulling out the oxygen and CO2? We can get information on that for people who can't, for whatever reason, get up and do a test. We have some people it's contraindicated because they still have bad heart disease and that's not taken care of, and we don't want to provoke a heart attack or something like that. Then we would do a resting one, and that would still give us a ton of information.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, and then the other misconception is that you can just calculate your zones and those will be accurate. And we see these big variability from trained athletes all the way through. For instance, for my heart rate zones in zone two, I have a really big zone two now because I've been working on it and working on it, and that's a really healthy place to be. But if you were to calculate my zones, it would be drastically different. And then my workout efficiency and the things that I'm doing, I'm a busy guy. I'm an executive. I don't have 2 hours to spend at the gym. I need every minute that I spend at the gym to be worth my time. And by me doing the VO2 max, I was able to make it worth my time to do that 30 minutes or 40 minutes of cardio because I get the most out of it. I think the last part is at the end, once you've built the base of zone two training, the HIIT training or high intensity interval training is the next thing that we layer on top to really push your VO2 max up to that next level, to really get you where you want to go and put you at that highest level to decrease your risk for all cause mortality.
Mm.
And I think it's also, I'm going to hit on all cause mortality really quick because people have this, they're like, how can it be all cause mortality? If your VO2 max is high and you get shot, you have a higher likelihood of surviving getting shot or stabbed or having a car crash because you're more healthy and it gives the doctors more time, right? Or the surgeon more time because you can compensate more.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
honestly the part about being healthy is just giving yourself more time in these scenarios, whether it's just living longer or when it comes to injuries or falling down, as you mentioned earlier in the beginning of the episode, falling down and hit like hurting your hip, you're giving yourself more time when you're healthier.
Exactly. So, and if you have a higher VO2 max and you get ill from pneumonia or from the flu, you have a much less likelihood of dying because your body can handle the insult. So, whatever insult that comes up, and people who have high VO2 max and heaven forbid they actually get cancer, they have a much higher likelihood of surviving it because they're so much more metabolically healthy. So it's all cause mortality because you're able to survive a heart attack. You're able to survive a cancer. You're able to survive a pneumonia. You're able to survive a trauma. And it's a much less significant insult because you were so healthy going into it.
Yeah. And I think that's a great It's a great, I think, way to think about it because a lot of times you just think you're being healthy to be healthy, to go on walks, to go on runs, but it's honestly all cause mortality, which means like what are different ways that can cause your mortality. So I think that's a great way of bringing it and like rounding it back because we are nearing the end of the podcast. So my final question is going to be, what's the one piece of advice you'd give to our listeners to start improving their view to max and metabolic health today?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is get out and get moving. So if you can do 30 minutes of sustained movement, not walking 1,000 steps or 2,000 steps, but 30 minutes of sustained movement where you're in that zone where you're a little breathless, but can still talk, but can't sing, that's going to make a major impact in your life if you do that every day. I think if I can encourage you to do that and do something and you don't have to do all or nothing. Do something, just not nothing. That's what I always encourage everyone to do there. And at my clinic, and it really does make a difference because sometimes they'll be like, Dr. Bennett, I only had 10 minutes, but I did it, and I feel like I conquered the day. And that's how we want to feel every day. And that's part of our longevity journey is feeling like we conquered the day and we feel better and more excited about doing it again tomorrow.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great, resounding, strong mission to keep and a goal that everyone should strive for. So, just want to say thank you again, Dr. Bennett, for coming out today and discussing all things VO2 Max. I've definitely learned a lot from you, and I believe our listeners can definitely say the same. So, thank you so much for coming here today and talking us through all these different factors that make up VO2 Max and the different ways it can impact each core aspect of our lives.
Thanks, Shalini. It was great to talk about this. And if anybody has questions, they can reach out to us.
Thank you.
All right, bye bye.